Uh, hey, good evening. This is Scott Wersing, and welcome to ISPI of Hampton Roads monthly meeting. My name is Scott Wersing. I'm the Director of Programs. I work as an instructional systems specialist for the United States Coast Guard at Training Center Yorktown. Erwin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Erwin Jankovic. I'm a former academic who moved to Boeing and the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California.
Great. Lisa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. I'm the owner and CEO of Innovative Learning Group here in Michigan. And Richard, boy, I remember when you were a keynote on the big stage at the ISPI conference and how impressed I was. So it's a treat to hear you speak again tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I was born and raised in Michigan.
Whereabouts?
Howell,
Okay. All
halfway
right.
between Detroit and Lansing, and halfway
Oh, that's
between
awesome.
everything.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Max, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Max Cropper, and I'm CEO of First Principles, or of actually of Five Star Performance Solutions. But I mainly teach workshops with Dr. Merrill and promote his First Principles of Instruction. And I work with on performance improvement with Billy Annell and leadership development with Leroy Mon.
Great. Leslie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, Leslie here. Actually new to the role, Associate Instructional Designer for healthcare technology company. So I've been trying to jump into a lot of these sessions and trainings. So happy to be here. I'm actually in Arizona.
Great, thanks. Mike Saunderson, good to hear. It's good to see you're here.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Richard, and this chapter to inviting you. And so I'm Mike Saunderson, and I'm, a consultant with Ethnopraxis and have a PhD in the evaluation of the transfer of learning to on-the-job performance. So that's who I am.
Thanks. Nadia, why don't you introduce yourself?
She said she was in Chile, so maybe
Okay.
there's some connection problems.
Yes,
Versus-
text
All right.
issues.
Secondary school teacher from, all right, great. I see that in the chat. Thanks. I can't monitor everything. Hold on. One more person trying to join. Oh, Stephanie's joining. Cool. We'll come back to Stephanie in a second. Vance.
Good evening, Vance Kinsey. I work for the United States Navy. I'm currently a Lean Six Sigma instructor, Master Black Belt. Glad to join.
Great. And Stephanie, we're doing introductions.
You're on mute still.
Stephanie, you there?
I am here. Hi, how is everybody?
Good.
I'm Stephanie Shipman. I work for PRA Group out of Norfolk. I've been in the industry for a long, long time, over 20 years, and I'm very excited to be here tonight.
Great. Thanks. All right. Get over to you, Richard. Introduce yourself to people that don't know who you are or why you're famous, and then we'll go on to your presentation.
Well, infamous is probably better than famous. Anybody that complains about stuff ends up being infamous. I'm an ex-professor of psychology and surgery, interestingly enough. That's a story by itself. I'm not a physician. Um, and I'm interested in trying to do evidence-based work, always have been. I'd like to be able to suggest and use things that have worked and have been found to work over and over again when tested, as I know you all do also. And so since that changes from time to time, I think it's a good idea to update what we know about the different strategies that are out there that are quite popular. I've tried to pick 5 of them that people tell me are very popular. I don't think there's any survey data about this, but it would be interesting if any of you know about it, let me know. I'm Clark at usc.edu if you want to send anything off. And so what I intend to do today is mention each one of these 5. I want to talk about what the intention is with each one of these training strategies. And then I want to talk about the evidence that it doesn't work and why, and then what does work and what the evidence is for that. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about, I'm going to spend some time on, and I'd like to, I'm really open to discussion about these things. I'm open to questions, I'm open to comments, whatever y'all think, just raise your hand, indicate you want to chat, and let's do that. So let's next go to the 5. Discovery training, learning styles, digital natives. Multitasking is not usually thought of as a training strategy, but increasingly people are being asked as part of, I think, number 1, discovery training, to try to tackle a lot of learning tasks at once. And in doing that, the expectations, maybe they're better. And then finally, and it's always at the end, which is too bad, we'll talk a little bit about motivating and what works in motivation. What do we know now? What's the latest on motivation? Fair enough. And so to go to the first one, discovery training next. The whole idea here, and this is a very popular approach right now, I think, is to ask trainees to discover what they need to learn. It's called inquiry learning, constructivism, project. I've run out of space for the number of terms that's used to describe this. But the basic thing is that trainees have to take ownership and they have to learn. They're given tasks, they're told what they need to learn how to do, and then they're left either as individuals or as groups to do that. And the assumption is that it will give them ownership of the result. Everybody's had to learn this way. I mean, nobody would have learned anything initially if it wasn't sort of by struggling with it and figuring it out. The assumption is they'll develop learning strategies for the future. They'll learn how to learn, and also that it'll motivate them. They'll value it because they got it for themselves, so to speak. The problem next is that it basically doesn't work. Let's go next to the next slide. It doesn't work. The evidence right now is that once you do this, for most, but not all people, but for a good 80 to 90% of people, it overloads their what's called their working memory. 2 kinds of memory: working in short term. When you learn something, you put things into working memory at first, and then gradually, as you rehearse them, as you do them over and over again, they drift into what's called long-term memory. Problem with working memory is it's a very small space. It handles about 4 plus or minus 2 items. With some people, it's more, some less. I'm going to talk in a moment about for whom is it more and for whom is it less. But the thing is that once it's overloaded, it just crashes. Learning stops, basically. And when it stops, self-efficacy suffers. That your trust in yourself and being able to do it for the next time you try, it mostly fails. And when it does, here's the worst part of it. Not only does learning crash, but it switches people into what the neuroscientists call the default mode in the brain. And can we talk about that for a second? Because I think there's some interesting new data about this, that there's 3 brain networks that are operating all the time. The salience mode, salience meaning importance, is a mode that has to do with your beliefs, your priorities, what's important to you, your focus. And this is what neuroscientists call a switcher network. Things come into it, we analyze how important they are to it, and then we switch them either to 1 or 2 other brain networks. One is the executive network, which is where we need to be to learn something. That's about how to do it. That's about self-control. And also, it's interesting that it's a very important vehicle for reframing negativity. A lot of what defeats people is they get angry, they get frustrated, they lack interest, whatever it is. And this executive network helps them reframe or rethink something and be more, more positive, more mature about it. Listen, I got to do this, so get over it, get beyond it, and get going. Or it switches us into what's called the default mode. And that's where you don't want to be. That's daydreaming. That's basically a loss of control. It's losing attention. It's switching to other things that you want to think about or do. It's pleasurable. That's the tough part about it. Being in that mode is very pleasurable. And as a matter of fact, the evidence is that it uses about 80% of all the energy in the brain, which leads a lot of people to believe that we spend most of our time in this default mode. Rather than being productive, we're just simply drifting and daydreaming. That's another way to talk about it. So now, what works here? What keeps this from happening, and what produces the most kind of evidence or the most kind of learning for most people? The next slide is the description of that system. I think this is the current best description of what works, according to all the evidence. Not only that, but a number of European countries are beginning to mandate using this in schools. And it's possible, for example, Belgium has mandated this. And their success in schools has jumped enormously. They're very excited. That's leading the Brits and the Germans and the Dutch and so on to think about mandating it also, certainly requiring it of teachers. Where I don't think we've got a lot of evidence is how often it's used in business settings, in corporate settings. But let me shut up now for a second and let you read those 9 things rather than me speaking them to you. So this guided experiential learning, which is something that I've called it before, I'd call it GEL, but what other people lately have been calling fully guided training or fully guided learning. You recognize all of it, I'm guessing. I don't think anybody in training would be confused about any of those options. The issue is that most people don't want to spend the time to design all that and don't think it's necessary for most people. In fact, what it is an attempt to provide them all the information they need to do the most complex tasks that people can do. There's 2 kinds of knowledge there: procedural knowledge, which is performance knowledge, step by step, and declarative knowledge, which is cognitive knowledge. Things like concepts and processes, facts that people need to understand something, even principles in some kinds of engineering-based or science-based occupations. So those things have to be done, not necessarily exactly in that order. There are other kinds of things that go along with this. For example, there's some evidence about the number of steps. I'll talk about that in a minute. But in all the cases on these things, I've listed the best current review of the research on it. So you'll find that on my overheads, which are going to be available when I finish here. So with this as an idea, let me take the next step here and talk a bit about why this is supposed to work. Let's go to the next slide. When we test it, unguided training, which is the thing we've talked about here, this more sort of discovery-based training, the percent learned is about 34% across all the studies that they've done on it. That 34%, by the way, turns out to have been learned by people who may not have needed the training in the first place. The evidence for that is pretty strong, actually. And the people that didn't learn never learned much. That 60 minutes learning time, that just is for the people that stuck it out. Most people quit, either by then or certainly before then. Minimally guided means half of those things are half done. And here we had 68% training in about 50 minutes. Strongly guided training, more learning, 89%, in yet less time. So not only is it more effective, it's more efficient. Let's go to the next one. Wait, let's go back, because I want to talk about this for a second. I think it's really important to know if you have any questions about this, because I think this is the whole idea here. And this is where I'm going to go with some of these other things. I'm going to come back to this, and I'd like to make sure that it makes sense. Let's go back to the original screen, just one more. Okay, this one. Any questions about this at all? Let me stop. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
So, Merrill's five principles talks about the importance of a relevant task. And is relevance in one of these kind of things in gel, or talk about how the task has to be a real world task rather than something that they may do? So, talk a little bit about that.
You're talking about Dave Merrill's work?
First principles, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Dave, Dave was, and I both, I think, were always concerned that a lot of training was fictional. I mean, it was stuff that was required of people, usually by law or by some kind of corporate rule, and yet they never used it. Stop me. I'm not even going to talk about, I mean, who has to be a critic of that kind of approach? I can understand how it might happen. I mean, we all know what politics are like in large organizations. Everybody's been involved in it. And sometimes people get in arguments and the settlement of it is something that makes no sense. The problem when you do things that way, of course, is that people begin not to trust training. That it really reduces their motivation to get engaged in it. So not only do these exercises have to reflect the work setting, but the whole context of the training, as best as we can, should reflect that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Max?
that's what I thought you would say. Go ahead, Max.
Yeah, so like Scott was saying, with Merrill's first principles, which he didn't write about until 2002, he realized that we need to be teaching with real world tasks, real world problems, real world scenarios, meaningful, significant ones. And then he called social constructivism fooled ignorance. somewhat facetiously, but somewhat seriously, yet towards the end of his, I guess there was kind of a cold war between the constructivists and the cognitivists in the 1990s. But
I think
towards
there
the end,
still is, Max. I think it's still a big
yeah,
issue.
well, the thing is if you have expertise, if you have enough expertise, constructivism is okay.
And that's the next point I'm going to make, actually.
Yeah. So
here's the problem. How do you
don't,
decide how much expertise people need to take benefit to training that doesn't give them a whole lot of information?
yes.
And it turns out, I think there's a way to do that. And I think it's going to get a lot more effective soon. We'll talk about that. I'll talk about it more in a minute, but I want to be more explicit about it. Okay. All right. I'm with you. Dave Merrill was a wonderful guy. He and I worked together for years and traveled together. I learned a huge amount from him. Terrific human being, too. Had a great sense of humor. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Any other questions about this one for Richard?
More just a comment. I guess what I've heard over the years is, and this is helpful that you clarify this. I've heard that discovery learning is efficient. Is effective, but it takes more time. And like that struggle is good because people really figure it out and remember it. So this is helpful to dispel that.
I'm guessing that people think back about when they learned something that they weren't trained to, and they just struggled with it, and finally they got it. And that makes it very difficult to set it aside as a strategy for all time. Mm-hmm. If you have no training, what do? Well, you do your best. But if you don't have to do your best, and if somebody can make it a lot quicker and a lot more effective for you, why shouldn't we do that? And that's our job, really. Mm-hmm. So, and yet people get very angry about this. I sort of feel like I'm being accused of being an authoritarian bigot or something when you make this argument. There are people who get deeply offended. And I don't know how to make that easier for them. But if you look at the evidence, when you find somebody that learns from discovery learning, you find out they didn't need the training. They had everything they needed to know. Maybe there were a couple of things they had to discover, but it wasn't more than a couple, and they were often pretty obvious. So what's not to like? All right. Anything else? Let's go on to the next one.
So next week, Merrill's co-facilitating a workshop with me at AACT on first principles using AI tools.
Oh, terrific.
Anyway,
And I got to get in touch with Dave. I didn't know he was doing that. So thanks for that.
yeah.
All right. Here's another thing that comes up over and over again. Shaping training for individual differences. Great idea and effective, maybe, depending on what that means. And the problem is that the individual differences that people have worked with don't work. Here's the one that's most popular: visual, auditory, print, and muscle learners. I mean, it all makes some kind of sense. There are people that think of themselves as I've got to see it to understand it. Some people say, well, I got to read about it and so on. They're wrong, by the way. Almost always, their own view of themselves is not accurate. But what it does is lead people in training to think, well, they are determined about it. So let's give the visual people pictures and let's have narration options. That's, by the way, what we're doing right now. Let's make sure we've got print for others. And this physical action stuff is very difficult. These people got to be hands-on, we say, and they're kinesthetic learners. Well, none of that works. Let's go next. There is an individual difference that makes a huge amount of it. It's hugely important. And that is something called prior knowledge. People with more prior knowledge require a lot less training. Now, what does that mean, prior knowledge, and how do you measure it? Well, if you think about the list of things that were in the highly structured, that fully guided learning, it was, for example, what concepts and processes and facts do people need to learn in order to perform each step in a procedure? Do they understand the steps? Do they know what the sequence is? Have they seen it done before so that they can understand what sequence they have to acquire? In other words, have they seen a demonstration at some point? So what is interesting here, and this is more recent, the last couple of years, is that people with high prior knowledge are not, that this more structured approach does not cause them trouble. They don't drop out. They don't get frustrated because they have to look at it. And so the evidence almost becomes that it's okay to use this more detailed structured approach with everybody. I'm guessing that eventually what's going to be important is that AI is going to be able to pre-test people. It's going to be able to individualize the presentation, which is given based on the prior knowledge of individuals, and compensate for that by offering them what they don't have, which would be much less time, much more efficient for them than make them go through everything. So a combination of our task analysis, what a lot of us now call cognitive task analysis on the one hand, being administered by AI to get out the knowledge that's required. Once that happens, the AI systems can easily tease out the different kinds of knowledge, can create tests or assessments on them, and find an efficient way to identify those people who have more or less prior knowledge, but more importantly, the specific kind of knowledge that they don't have but need in order to benefit from some instruction that would provide that for them. Does that make sense? Any questions about that?
How
Leslie?
how frequent in your experience, this all comes down to learner analysis. AI would replace a learner analysis, but I've always seen that instead of actually doing the learner analysis, we'll try to develop the training based on a learning style. Isn't that kind of the cop out as I've seen it in the last 20 years? It's skipping learning analysis and we'll just design the learning styles.
Doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work, but people like to replace hard work with learner analysis, prior knowledge. What do you already know? We're not going to do that. We're just going to try to make it fun to learn based on these kind of things. And I'm like, you're wasting time. you
And I
know,
think
goes back to the
people
goes to the basics.
overemphasize the visual learner and they struggle to make everything a picture. It's like, what's that a picture of? I don't even know what that graphic is showing me. Just give me a bulleted list.
So Lisa, what would you do if one of your clients said, "We'll pay you $500,000 to develop training based on visual learners"?
Yeah,
What
I'd
would you
say,
say to that?
do you want a pilot that's learned or a surgeon that's learned their job by watching a video?
No. All right. So you use that you use that analogy. You're like, so you wouldn't even do it no matter how much they were paying you.
No, sir, Scott.
That's good. I think again, you try to talk them off that ledge and go, yeah. Do you want a surgeon who's learned by pictures or actually by doing?
That does get people's attention. And I often use those kinds of examples to persuade people because, in fact, what we found out was that surgeons often train other surgeons by showing them videos of the surgery while they describe what that surgeon needs to be doing. Problem is, they leave out about 70% of what the new surgeons need to know to do it. And they don't pick up that 70% by watching the video because the video doesn't show them how to make decisions. And that's what most experts who are now trainers leave out are the decisions that need to be made. So that's a mistake that somebody's going to make. And sometimes if it's a surgeon, that mistake's going to be serious. We just fed in a number of the protocols that we developed as a result of task analysis with surgeons to an AI system. Ask it to start developing training. And what it came back with in addition to the training was the description about what some of the expert surgeons that were doing that might have been killing patients, literally. And when the surgeons looked at it, they went, wow, we've been arguing about that for quite a while, but obviously here's some that's got data that we ought to be paying attention to. And they've actually sent out a notice about not doing a certain procedure because it turns out that for enough people, it causes a serious problem during a surgery. So just doing a visual doesn't work. I'm sorry.
I try not to tell people that learning styles are foolish or a myth because they say, are you designing the instruction for visual learners? And so I would say, yes, we're having the instructor give a demo of the performance task. That's what I say. I don't try to tell them that visual learning isn't a style. I just try to say that everybody learns really well from a demo, and then they actually get to try it and get feedback on it. That's not a learning style. That's just good performance. Goes back to your gel model and all those things. It's just like that's effective training.
I think there
And
are a
that's
lot
actually
of,
go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. I
Go
think
ahead,
there are a
Max.
lot of people who might characterize themselves as, A, B, or C. Like they might say, I'm a visual learner, but they remember all the rock songs they've listened to, so there's a lot of ways to learn.
Go
Well,
ahead,
and
Max.
great thing
Yeah,
about those rock songs, you never forget them either, no matter what.
yeah. So, so I recommend teaching in the media or whatever, the mode that they need to be performing in. So if they need to be performing hands-on, then give them demonstration and practice hands-on. If they need to be giving a presentation, then give demonstration practice on giving a presentation. If they need to be writing, then have them practice writing. Now the
I'm curious
challenge.
about why anybody would do anything else.
so so
Because
the,
they're
the
busy.
so the challenge is when feelings are involved. How do you help people have the right feelings as they're learning? Because feelings are a big issue. Anyway, uh, one of my mentors, Daryl Allington, did some work with J.P. Guilford and his structure of intellect model, and then we kind of translated into more like Bloom and Merrill terminology. But anyway, I used to teach that model, but now I just go back and I say, well, let's just do cognitive task analysis and teach to the tasks, and that will take care of the Bloom taxonomy and Guilford and Merrill's taxonomies.
I think this is an issue that really is related to motivation, and I think it's critical. The way you put things to people is very important. I think the suggestion, for example, not to say that things don't work, but to try to find something in what you're doing that's similar to what a person's asking for. That's terrifically motivating for a client. And I notice a lot of your issues have to do with clients, not students, not trainees. They tend to accept what they see, but clients are often the problem, I think. Scott's suggestion was a good one to start with here. And I think actually we ought to do a whole lot more work on motivation. I think we know a lot about how to train people effectively. I'm not sure we know a lot about how to motivate them to want to be trained, or once they are trained, to use what it is that they have hopefully learned. That's the real issue, and that's not something we've made huge benefits, huge steps in. But we'll get there, at least talk about what is there, and then maybe what could be there, what needs to be there. Anything else here before we go on? All right, let's go on. Digital natives. Those like visual learners in a way. It's the same thing. It's like these kids grew up with technology. That's all they're familiar with it. That's all they're comfortable with. And it's much more motivating to them to use very high-tech presentations with all that implies. The fact that there's no research evidence for it doesn't matter all that much to people. The issue is, again, like if we're talking about differences between learners, what is most important is the prior knowledge that they've got about the technology. If they have to use the technology, then it has to be prior knowledge of that technology and the tasks that they're going to be asked to learn and to perform. I can't imagine people easily accepting this. How many of you have heard this from people, the Gen Z or the high-tech people? I mean, it's been going on. I started arguing about this back in the 1970s. That technology is so important for speed, for efficiency, for cost, for availability. All that is critical, but it's not important in learning or in instruction. Period. That analogy of grocery trucks deliver food to the store, but they don't influence your nutrition. People have misunderstood that, by the way. I mean, the arguments have been, well, what about frozen food? This kind of thing. But none of that matters. Once you go over and over that argument, in fact, it is the case. I just wish people focus more on speed and efficiency and cost, because those are real issues, I think. And sometimes they dictate a technology that makes it a bit challenging to present training. How do you demonstrate if what you have is print and can't do graphics? Because many demonstrations require some kind of graphic. I'm going to avoid trying to give examples here. Everybody gets online to try to learn how to do something. I got online last week to learn how to do something. I watched 5 different videos, and all of them skipped 2 steps that were absolutely essential to do it. So bottom line, digital natives don't learn best from computers and the internet necessarily. They may think that they like it better, but they'll learn something from however you provide it in the best instruction. So that's it for that. Shall we go on?
Oh no, okay.
Okay.
I mean, one of my favorite books was from Larry Cuban back in 1995 about oversold and underused technology in the classroom, going back to film strips and film and radio, and it's been going on for 100 years. And it's always, it's easier to show the superintendent or the head of the corporation that people are busy using laptops or computers than to actual show learning. And so, because learning is something that happens in the mind. Now, if they're performance focused, then you could show that their performance is improved based on the technology. But I still haven't seen a whole lot of evidence-based training that people can perform better using the technology than than not, and only if the technology is actually part of the performance. And that's where I'm not against technology, but I'm only using technology if it's actually part of the performance.
That's
Well,
absolutely the case, I think.
well, and it's really hard to provide meaningful practice online. And so, I mean, you can provide really good demonstrations online and really good instruction, but practice, you almost have to go offline. But what I've seen is information-based online training with, with 5 true false questions for the evaluation, no minimal examples, maybe no examples and no practice.
Well, I think Sal Khan came up with a way to use technology to help people learn, students learn. He uh, he would teach math, for example, and the gifted people could reach like a high level of proficiency in answering the questions. But many people, when they hit a barrier to learning a concept, that they'd stop, and in real life, they're never, they think they don't know how to do math. He when the system recognized that they had failed an item, they would go back a step and give them practice doing the thing that would let them to be successful in the next level. And when they passed that, then they'd have hit another barrier. He'd do the same thing. He was able to take kids who were failing math and make them almost as proficient as the people who were proficient at the math. And he did this over and over and over, lots of demonstrations of it.
Would it be impossible for an instructor, for a trainer to do that?
Uh, they probably could iterate a little bit on that. They could at least give examples and say, if you understand this, you should be able to use this, answer this question, or recognize this piece, and then give them feedback if they got it wrong, that here's why, what you missed, or that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Well,
I guess what I'm asking is it a strategy that you wouldn't have to have the technology in order to accomplish?
Sure.
Then it's not a technology-based thing. It's a strategy that requires you to know when somebody's skipped or not accomplished a
Right,
step
that's fair.
and get them to go back and repeat it. And that's a critical part of this fully guided system.
yeah, it's
Not just
coaching.
practice, but going back and correcting when you've made a mistake. Max?
Yeah, it's technological or non-technological coaching.
The reason I insist that I come back to that over and again, because I want people to focus on what the strategy is. That's the critical thing, not what delivers the strategy, but what makes it work and why. And then you can take the next step and say, and probably mostly you do, that technology is probably the most efficient and effective way to present this strategy, because that's actually the case. And it's going to get even more the case once AI gets more deeply involved in all this. It's going to be able to monitor the performance of every individual in a very large group and figure out what they didn't get, what they did not understand, what mistake did they make, and then how would you go back and provide that information and then give them another opportunity to go through it. Wouldn't be the first time somebody suggested it. It might be the first time that it's widely possible in an efficient and effective delivery system. We're going to see in another few months or years, that's for sure.
So, Richard, are you for or against technology in training?
Totally in favor of it. What I'm not for is trying to attribute learning to the technology rather than to the strategy that you've used to decide what information gets presented and how, and what you ask of a learner in order to make certain that they can perform it eventually for themselves. And there's not enough thought about that. That's been our problem. I think this confounding with technology is still a big problem for us. It's so obvious.
Well, I think technology has always been the bright and shiny object that people
Yeah.
like to chase.
Yep.
and like to implement, whatever that may be. And it's changed over and over. Max and I have put together a slide of bright and shiny objects and technology that people would rather do than actually standard, what we know is good design performance-based training. They'd rather distract people with bright and shiny objects and learning journeys, whatever buzzword you can come up with in the last 10 years. And it's like, wait a second, it's not you can't replace good, well-designed, as you said, your gel model. If it has those elements, it'll be good no matter who, if it's a digital native or an older person or a younger person, it'll
Well,
work for them.
the learner though isn't, if they haven't gone through this session, for example, they may not know to categorize the learning experience by that structure. So they're going to say the technology really helped me learn.
So if you have the right strategy, then the shiny tools become, or shiny objects become shiny tools, because we have tools now to do instruction in ways that we just couldn't before. And now you have AI to enhance those tools. And so, but they still need to be based on this basic
I'm curious
strategy.
about what you mean by instruction that we couldn't do earlier, Max.
Well, it's a lot easier to do two-way video now. So learners could actually show with video, live or recorded performance, so we could evaluate their performance. It's a lot easier to produce videos, a lot easier to produce videos of different types of performance.
It's much more efficient to do what we could do
Yes,
without the technology. And
yes,
I totally agree. It's
yeah.
ridiculous to talk about doing it a different way.
Oh my
But
goodness.
but the focus on it, the shiny thing, I like that notion because the shiny thing distracts you from what we need to be improving all the time, which
Yeah.
is the method. Somebody else is working on the technology.
Yes.
I mean, that's not our job necessarily. Well, maybe it is for some of us, but not generally. I think what we sell our skills as designers, developers, and assessors of learning of all kinds. That's it. And it doesn't have to do with, well, I suppose we are asked occasionally about efficiencies and distribution and so on and so forth. Those are important issues, but they're not method issues.
No.
So, and I don't know how, and by the way, this is true also and mostly true for people that manage large budgets like states and federal government. Their sense is if they bought TV sets or if they bought computers, they've solved the problem. Well, you've got the technology. Why isn't this working? And why are teachers in classrooms? Well, because they have to make sure that we don't have discipline problems. They're there to watch the kids, so to speak. When in fact, they're there to teach. They're another medium. So, all right.
So
Well,
one of the other examples of this is I think the pendulum's swinging back to be less technology. So my daughter's at a sixth grade private middle school, and it's doesn't have Chromebooks or laptops. It has real textbooks and teachers demonstrating stuff on whiteboards because it's like there's already enough technology in their lives. Let's go back to the basics of demo practice feedback, not get distracted by the technology and all those issues. And because it's a private school, they don't have the money for all those things. So it's interesting to see, and I'm starting to see evidence of parents and people looking for less technology for their children rather than more technology. I don't know if anybody else is seeing that.
that's interesting. Has anybody else seen it? I'm wondering if it's a trend. Actually, people may be asked to value the fact that human beings are investing intelligent effort with their kids, as opposed to just sticking them in front of a machine for something that's not actually going to be all that effective. Certainly not going to be all that tailored for their children. That makes sense to
But
me.
when I grew up, that's how everybody learned.
Yeah,
And a lot of
yeah.
people never learned math because that's how people taught math. So
They taught it, you mean on technology?
No,
No?
just like what Scott described. But the practice would be, okay, here's some homework. You can practice doing these things on these problems. And of course, people fail and then they didn't learn it. So
Mhm. Hey, John, you have a question or
Yeah, I
comment?
did, more a comment. I think um, a lot of the issues come from our failure to define requirements. That if we do the instructional design and we know what needs to be taught, and then we say, here's what I need to do that. And if that's some new technology that comes out of that, that's great. None of that do I ever see anything happening. That's not how it works. The new technology shows up looking for a use. And then all of a sudden we focus on the marvelous technology and we start looking for where can I use that technology to teach? That's backwards. And it's wonderful for marketing. But I mean, I do a lot of stuff when I'm in the medical world now. And when I look at devices that are being introduced in the medical world looking for a use, because by God, if I can sell that in the medical world, I can sell it for 10 times more dollars than I can in the education world. And we got suckers everywhere. They just, whoa, and then they take off looking for a way to use it. Okay, old guy, just, rah.
John, I think that's actually a very nice insight because it's easier to sell machines than it is to sell strategies.
Oh, yeah,
That's a good part of the problem here.
yep.
They're so attractive and there's a real focus on it, and they are incredibly useful in society and in corporations and in schools. And the fact that they're useful for one thing doesn't mean they're useful for everything. And that's the argument that needs to be made and isn't very often or isn't very compellingly. I don't know how we make this change, but we're going to have to do that because technology is going to get to be more important even. I mean, AI is a technology-based system. The issue that everybody's trying to get us to think about that develops that stuff is what is built into it? What rules is it operating under? Because it's going to be so significantly more effective than anything else we've ever done. And the question is, how do you train it so that it does what you want and not what you don't want?
Yeah.
So how do you get the method in there that's going to be beneficial and not a method that will be destructive? Because
Well,
the latter is very
it's
possible.
not going to get easier because the management, the instructional developer, the training professional is a staff member in the company. And if the new bosses, the new generation of bosses who are focused on technological benefits for everything, they're going to buy it and they're going to tell you to use it. And as a training profession, we're going to become slaves to just doing what the hell ever we're told.
Yep.
Okay, I'm enough.
Any more
I'm
about
turning off the
technology and digital
microphone.
natives?
Anything more? All right. This probably shouldn't be here. This multitasking thing is everywhere. People are asked to do it at work. People are asked to do it in training. I've been looking at a whole lot of training exercises and organizations and find a lot of them now will put together a variety of tasks that may not have any relationship to each other at all. And they dump it all on trainees in this more discovery approach and say, you're going to get benefit if you try to learn all these things at once. You're going to find ways to integrate them. You're going to find there's benefits of things you learn in one area are going to pay off in others, and so on and so forth. And the answer is no, it doesn't work. It absolutely is worse. It's the worst form of that discovery learning. Multi-training, integrated learning, whatever it is actually a lot worse than just simply discovery learning on one task. For all the same reasons. It overloads working memory, it overloads people, they get off into this default mode. And by the way, the thing that is, I want to bring up another issue here, and that is that one of the downsides of being in this more daydreamy default mode, which happens, is that you stop paying attention. And if there's one basic exciting thing that I think is going on out there in the research right now, it's to understand how critical attention control is for everybody, for all things, but particularly for learning. The ability to focus on one task and not be distracted is enormously important. And people who can do it succeed. And as a matter of fact, there's now a feeling that people are going to start having to learn how to be able to control their attention a lot better. It makes me really concerned about people who have an attention deficit. By the way, is about some form of attention deficit is pretty much common for about a third of the population. A lot of them never get to the point where those that are very serious have difficulties even getting a job, but those that aren't find that they have a lot of difficulty learning. Even when good instruction is presented, they can't pay attention enough or long enough or consistently enough in order to benefit from it. So that turns out to be a very important, let's say, individual difference. There we got another one here, other than prior knowledge. By the way, attention control is something that I notice a lot of people are now starting to design training for attention control. I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but have you heard of this multi-training, multitasking? Anybody ever had it come up?
No, I think the pendulum's swinging the other way. All the high schools and middle schools here in Virginia have eliminated cell phones in the classroom. They realize that you can't listen to the teacher, watch a demo, and look at your phone. What
All
a
at the same time.
surprise. So it's one of those kind of cases that you can only focus on one thing at a time. And while multitasking sounds wonderful as a concept, that we can do multiple things at once, we're not computers. We don't have that much working memory and RAM like a computer that can do this computation and that thing while another thing's going in the background. We're terrible at that. But
I really support taking phones away from kids in schools, and that's what's happening. That's one very enticing form of distraction that eliminates. It doesn't eliminate the rest of them, however.
Here at the Coast Guard, we don't let the students have their cell phones out for their demos and practice either, because it's distracting, and you're not going to be using your cell phone when you're driving a boat. So why would you be using your cell phone in a classroom?
Right.
Put it away.
And there's always a interest in what they're doing on their cell phone at the time, and probably mostly TikTok or something like that. I mean, there are a lot of things that try to attract people's attention to ads, mostly advertisements. But the bottom line here is that, again, if you take the phone away from the kids in school or somebody in training, you can't take away their capacity to switch their attention to something in this default mode. Think about what's upsetting them, something going on in the family, a movie they saw yesterday, whatever it is that pops into their head that gets them thinking, gets them taken away from learning.
Well, the phrase that you see out there a lot is we're in an attention economy now.
An attention economy.
Yeah.
Define that, Erwin. I haven't heard that.
Oh, that's very common now. So all the phones and the videos and whatever, they're designed to draw your attention in, like TikTok and those kind of things that keep you locked in. Oh, that was really interesting. Oh, you like that? Here's another one. And
yeah, but I mean, even the Wall Street Journal, so the paid online version of the Wall Street Journal, you get a paragraph and then you get a flashing ad and then you get a paragraph. So like I try to scroll just enough to get the flashing thing out of the way so I can read the paragraph. It's horrible. And I have pretty good focus and it's horrible.
Right. In the attention economy, money is paired with attention.
So one of the faculty members at Utah State University had done extensive research on multitasking, and basically the research is no, multitasking doesn't happen. It doesn't work, even for women who are famous for doing multiple things at the same time. So the point is, I think your point on focus is really important, helping people focus and then avoiding all these, all these distractions for attention, like, Erwin is talking about anyway.
What do we do to get out of this? How do we have evidence for most of these things? It's very compelling, and nobody wants to look at it, actually.
No, you have to put away
how do we get them to take a look at what actually does work, regardless of what they think and hope works? To me, that's the big question.
Yeah.
They're not changing people's minds, but how do we reward them for what they're trying to do, which is do a good job? That's easy to forget. I mean, it's easy to call people lazy or, that they haven't looked deeply into something and yet they're insisting on it. But how do we change their minds? How do we change their behavior? How do we get them to support what's going to be best for them? That's the big thing to me.
Yeah, put away the distractions and focus.
Yep, absolutely.
Well,
Let's flip on to the
focus. It helps to focus if you have something more meaningful to focus on than the enjoyment of watching some wiggly video or something.
What I'm trying to do is to ask myself, what would get people to focus on learning to focus better? What would get people to value becoming more in control of their own attention? Because right now, most of us don't have control of our attention. We can exert it. We can focus on something for a short period, but not for very long. Give yourself the task sometime of looking at a point for as long as you can and decide and try to figure out how long that is. Something arbitrary. And you'll find that it'd be pretty odd to get more than a minute to a minute and a half. And that's not enough to do really significant work. And ideas watch what ideas pop into your head. Watch what you do to yourself to distract yourself as you've made the decision to focus on a point in your visual field and not stop focusing on it. What comes up? Because that's what your default mode is using to entice you in. I don't see what the survival benefit of that is, actually. It's an interesting question. Let's flip on to the next one because, we're talking about it already. Here's what I think is most interesting right now, which is that attention control turns out to be about 75% of intelligence. Or better, maybe that's too much of a statement. It's a correlation of 0.75 with IQ. So people with high IQs are people who have significant amounts of attention control. And the higher the IQ, the more focused they are. This is one of the reasons why people who are on the autism spectrum tend to turn out to be very intelligent. Maybe not socially intelligent, but they end up being very intelligent in whatever they choose to do because they can focus their attention. Finding ways to avoid distraction, finding ways to manage problems and solve issues, consider alternatives, all those things are really, really important, I think. And the size of working memory increases also. So rather than 4 things that you can store for short term, the more that your attention control is high, the more things you can put into short-term memory. So the more and the quicker that you learn whatever it is you choose to do. I also, at the bottom of the screen, you hear talk a bit about this intervals, this whole issue of intervals in learning. Have you heard of this Pomodoro thing? I think I misspelled it here. I think it's Pomodoro, which I think is the Italian word for tomato or something. Some guy in Italy basically made this suggestion of 25-minute intervals with 5-minute breaks in training. And it has stood up to, it was back in the 80s, and it stood up to a huge amount of research. And then after 4 of these 25-minute intervals, they talk about a 20 to 30-minute break and so on. So there are certain things that breaking this up into giving you a relief from your attention control, because it takes an enormous amount of energy to stay out of that default network in the brain. It's so pleasurable to be there, and it's so painful to focus your attention and do work that we've got to give people a break from it.
One of my staff, I know one of my staff practices that she sets a timer doing her work, not learning thing, but doing instructional design work.
I wonder how many people it would work for. I don't know of a lot of research on the type of tasks that this is best for, but people have used it with learning tasks, work tasks, the whole thing. And they've tried 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and so on. And it turns out this 25 minutes, for some reason that nobody quite understands, seems to be maximally beneficial. And that 5-minute break, it can be a little bit less than 5, but 5 minutes is pretty much works for everybody. And that might help. At least it makes it easier to focus your attention if you get a break from it. Let's put it that way. All right, let's go next, unless there's something else. Now let's talk about motivation. I decided to focus this to start with on rewards. It's really interesting. I did a review of the research on using rewards in instruction and training about 20 years ago, and it's like the 3rd most cited article in that area of psychology. So a huge number of people are interested in incentives and rewards for this. And I was pretty surprised about what the evidence is, that only 22% performance gain, and only if we use money. That's actually beginning to change a little bit. I think people might have overcome that. And I think the thing, and by the way, manual tasks, let's be clear, it's not cognitive learning that's benefited by money incentives. But there's a difference here that might be that TikTok might be leading. Are you aware of the literature on TikTok as a addiction? The Washington Post did a story on it just last week, and it might be interesting to look it up because they describe the whole story in some detail. And in their story, there's a website that you can call up that is much more specific about how a TikTok does it. But the evidence is that they managed to get people from when they first started TikTok, they're looking at it for maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Inside of 3 or 4 days, they're up to an hour. Inside of 10 days, they're at 3 to 4 hours. In other words, every day they're on TikTok for 3 to 4 hours. And it classifies and it's an addiction. And how do they do that? TikTok does it by apparently being very careful to analyze exactly what kinds of videos people want to see. And they tailor it for individuals. And the whatever program they have is extremely accurate. That's just, and by the way, the 4 hours includes an enormous number of ads, which is what's paying the bill. I'm wondering if addicted people weren't the ones that got behind trying to save TikTok so that we would still have access to it. Because as I understand it, it's the Chinese that have done the programming. Am I correct about that? That's what I've read. So the bottom line here is that it's not a dollar incentive. It does get people to persist, but they're not persisting at training. They're persisting at the kinds of videos that they like, most of which put them in the default mode. So that they're not learning anything necessarily. They're just doing more of what they find pleasurable. And that does not make it helpful for training. The motivators that are most current are the ones that are there on the screen. I call it the Beck model, but you call it what you like. Belief, expectancy, and control is what Beck stands for. Belief about the value of something. It's cost benefit. Cost benefit is a huge issue in value for everybody. People resist spending a lot of effort at something, and I can respect that. If there's a quicker way to do it, why not? The problem is that it gets people to choose what they believe to be easier or quicker ways, rather than ones that require them to invest the level of effort that's necessary to achieve a goal. The expectancy has to do with our own expectancies about ourselves, our belief about ourselves. What are we capable of? And that's a huge issue too. If we don't think we're going to succeed at something, we are not inclined to engage in it. We'll find all kinds of ways to avoid it. Very creative sometimes, I think. And then these control issues mount. People are not inclined to realize that control means that some people are very capable at controlling their emotions, their negative emotions when they're in training, when they're trying to learn something. Their anger, their fear, their anxieties, whatever else is there. They often do it by revising it, sort of rethinking what's going on. There's a lot of strategies there that work. And then control over the outcome, which you don't have all that much. Will I be supported if I learn how to perform this? As we were talking about before in the Merrill system, the question is it really necessary to learn this to apply it? Is that going to be necessary on your job? Is that going to be something that makes the effort that you've spent pay off? And then finally, at least for now, the control over persistence. What is it that eliminates as much distraction as possible when we're showing demonstrations? Well, it's the closer you can get to what people are actually being asked to do on the job, makes it easier for them to persist at it, makes it less likely that they will be distracted. And that end up right now as being seen as maybe the most important thing to be able to control is our distractions. But anger, fear, frustration, whatever it is, those are the things that make us susceptible to distractions. Roar Saxberg and I did a piece on what are the current most important features of motivation for performance. And Harvard Business Review not only published it, but they've made it the lead piece in a new book on motivation at work. So they've looked at it carefully and have a sense that at least for now, it's a pretty good description of what's out there. What's your take on motivation? Are there things other than this that you think might be important? Or some of these that may not be so important?
One of the things, it's probably another myth that a lot of instructional designers do is like, we're going to add gamification into our training. So people see they complete tasks and they're motivated because they see their name on a leaderboard. And I'm like, my gut level feeling is, do people that lead the leaderboard perform better on the job? And they go, we don't know. And I'm like, so, and what I think is gamification turns people off. Well, I'm so far on the bottom, I'll never catch up. So this kind of, I think motivating learning with learners and rewards is the same kind of thing. It's a myth because people like to play games on your phone doesn't mean like they like to play games and learning.
It's a
It doesn't
perfect
translate.
example because it's an example of giving people incentives to engage, and the incentive is the competition. The problem is the competition only involves a very few people who are willing to spend the effort and do it. Most people realize there's no way that they're going to compete adequately, so they just drop out. and nobody keeps track, so they don't know, except from the people who do engage, who are very vocal about how much they loved it and they enjoyed it, and yet you don't find out whether they learned anything. What's wrong with that?
Usually gamification is about tasks that are nice to know, not tasks that you actually have to do. So there's no relevance to them.
Well,
So
or at least they're
people are getting
fast.
distracted by the leaderboard rather than, these tasks I'm never actually going to do on the job. It's kind of all just like a simulation.
Well, and
Well, and
even if it's job related, it's facts, like product knowledge.
yeah.
And same thing, you get badges. It's all now about badges. And if you get so many badges and you get some swag from the company or whatever, like it feels like we're in kindergarten,
It's
No, and
it's an incentive system, basically, another form
yeah.
of it.
Well,
Well, and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, sense of accomplishment and self-realization are so much more important. People like to make a significant contribution. They like to be recognized for it, just thanked and recognized specifically. I think, Erwin, you talked about going to a whole workshop on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a vice president turn around a whole group of people who were just average performers and turn them into superstar performers in his little organization by ensuring that they always felt that what they were working on was really critical to the success of the company, not just the department. And so, and he did other things too about how he treated them and translated examples into real terms for them. So, for example, instead of talking about customer satisfaction, he would grab customers from the factory looking at their airplanes and have them come in and talk about what happens if there's an error in a product we produce. And it made it so meaningful for them. They were just jazzed though about working on it.
So
I
I'd
think
see
I
that
think
as
that's
an
number
example
one.
of the things that we're talking about here. That
Yeah,
is,
same
for
thing that
example, the value of what you do,
yeah,
your
absolutely.
ability to do it, and somebody acknowledging that you did it and were very able. That's indicated that you really were very capable, that you did have control over the outcome because it's going to pay off for you on the job. All of that. I actually think that if we're going to assess motivational systems like the very effective one you described, one of the ways to do it is to look at it from those three issues. Is it going to create more value for somebody? Is it going to help them feel more capable? And is it going to give them a better sense of their control over the job that they're doing? Are they going to be more effective at work?
Yeah,
And
did
those
all
things.
that. Yeah.
This business about controlling emotions and controlling persistence, that is not in the same category. Those are skills that we ought to begin to think about training people to do, especially the control of emotions. In addition to, I've already talked about persistence, but people get very frustrated, very angry, very upset. They generalize from whatever's going on in their lives, and it's very difficult for them to deal with it. And yet there are strategies that help you do that. And we could spend more time on it, I think. Somebody has looked at the emotions that people have that don't do well in training during the training before they don't do well. And they find that most all of them are dealing with negative emotions. Whether they're self-inflicted or not, doesn't matter. It does affect their performance. I wish we could do a better job here. That's the end of my 5. I've got some citations for all of these things. Is there anything else you want to bring up? Are there any other strategies out there that you feel are help me learn something that you feel are common and enjoyed, but probably don't have a lot of evidence for them?
I know that in my career, being able to chunk concepts from a bunch of little pieces into a higher order concept simplifies the memory load problem. So I don't have to remember all the details because the chunk contains what I know about those details. And then I compare the chunk with a different chunk. And doing that, I was able to learn how to fly a DC-10, for example.
Bobby Dave.
So
I'd love to talk to you more about that. That's interesting.
sure.
This is something in Merrill's system I think is strong at. This whole notion of concepts and chunking. That's one of the things he taught me.
Well,
We don't talk about types of knowledge very much, but really there are a limited number of types of knowledge, and it's possible to define them. They're clearly different from each other, and they're all necessary to learn how to do complex things.
Well, Einstein said how did you do that? He said, well, nature favors a prepared mind. And so you have to be able to see, you have to be in a position to see what you haven't seen before.
True. Absolutely.
What's your best email, Richard? I have the
Try Clark. The easiest one is Clark at USC, University of Southern California, .edu.
Okay. It's in the chat for people, or when you want to connect with Richard.
Please.
Or
Are
Max,
you also on LinkedIn?
Richard and Dave again.
And if you want copies of things that I've cited and you find difficult, I'll let me know. I'll send them to Scott or somebody, and maybe hope that there's a way to post them and make them available to you.
Could you talk a little bit about what kind of work you were doing in helping apply psychological learning or whatever to surgery?
Yes. As a matter of fact, it's still going on.
Okay.
What we did is we took this this fully guided approach, but more importantly, we took task analysis to surgery, and we talked the surgical department at USC into letting us interview the top experts, the top surgical experts at a procedure, a fairly complex one, that all surgeons needed to learn. It had to do with how to get fluids into people really fast in an emergency. And in order to do that, after we did a task analysis, a cognitive task analysis, we divided 24 surgical residents into two groups. The experts that we interviewed, and there were 5 of them actually, taught the 12, and I taught the other 12. Or at least the training we designed. Well, I had to have a physician with me always, but a surgeon, but basically it was taught by a non-surgeon. And then what was exciting about surgery is that if you make a mistake in surgery, it's a matter of public record. You do not hide, well, as you try to hide mistakes, they may, I don't know, but these guys certainly didn't. So we followed them for a year after the training. And the people that had gotten this training that we're talking about performed so significantly better, about 40% more learning. They made no serious mistakes. They learned in about half the time. And that was so exciting to the surgeons that they bought into it big time. They're still using it, actually. And as a result, they gave me a professorship in surgery, which I don't think I deserved at all. But it served me in good stead since. I have no trouble getting in to see really good docs that are not taking patients. But the bottom line here is that the surgeons liked it, which I found surprising. And they liked it because that gave them more time in surgery. They didn't have to spend so much time training. They liked it for the second reason, because we discovered decisions that they were making during surgery that they never taught students about, because they had so automated the decisions and they'd automated the cues that indicated they needed to make the decision and how to make them. And so the reason that we were a benefit is that it turns out, we still don't understand this, but some surgeons actually remember how to make decisions, that they make decisions that other surgeons have automated and can't remember. So we felt we had to had to interview a number of surgeons or any experts until we got as many decisions as we could. They all remembered what they could see themselves doing, even though they probably automated it, but they could watch themselves literally. What they couldn't watch themselves do is make decisions. Now, let me update just a little bit. Recently, we fed the protocols that we had captured from these expert surgeons into AI. And we were teaching the AI to do cognitive task analysis. So we said, take these questions and answers, notice what the questions are, be ready to ask those questions yourselves, but also analyze the responses that were made and come back to us with what you understand the training should look like. Well, it came back with a whole lot of information that we didn't see at all when we came up at first. It noticed, for example, that the two of the expert surgeons were saying that there was a decision to be made at a certain point that if you didn't make it a certain way, you ran the risk of puncturing an artery. And that had actually resulted in the death of a number of patients. Now, when they hadn't seen this before, there'd been a little bit of discussion about it. Somebody found in a journal, but nobody actually had reached a conclusion about it. And now all surgeons are being told not to do this anymore. So that's a huge benefit. And by the way, it did a whole lot of other analyses that we didn't even think of that would have taken us a huge amount of time, months actually, of looking through protocols and records in order to determine. It did it in seconds and then came up with a conclusion. So that's what we've done in surgery. We picked surgery because it was complex and we thought it would persuade people. We did the same thing with other, what we thought were complex tasks. For example, we redesigned the training for the European Patent Office, the training of brand new patent examiners. Europe put together all of their different patent offices into one at some point back in the 90s and into the 2000s. And that meant some pretty complex training that had to happen because the issue was what were the general rules in all of these different countries on patents. And the curious thing there was that we had almost the same experience. In other words, we found a way to train them hugely faster than they were being trained. They had 2.5-year training, and we did it in 3 months. And after the 3 months, the people that were trained were over 50% more effective than the people that had been trained for 2.5 years. I could go on. And by the way, they didn't implement the training. We did it, they paid us, walked away, and they kept exactly what they had. So I liked the guy that was head of training. He was very upset about this, and he was a Brit, and he and I are still friends, actually. So I said to him, what happened? Why didn't, well, he said, they really thought that the new people needed a couple of years to kind of season themselves. Okay.
Well, sometimes people have to learn from the mistakes that they're making, or other people make a mistake, and then they have to correct the mistake or recognize the mistake. And so the learning part isn't all that a job requires. It's all the surrounding stuff too. But you could accelerate it like you're describing.
Yeah, and I can't understand why people wouldn't want to accelerate it. I think they maybe didn't trust that what happened in the research would happen if it were implemented generally. But these were engineers mostly. I mean, these are people with you know, okay, all right. I'm tempted to think that engineers are more focused on evidence than other people.
Well, their kind of evidence, not
yeah,
your
that's
kind
true.
of evidence.
Okay, fair enough.
Well,
That's
thanks,
one of my biggest disappointments.
thanks, Richard, for taking your time and sharing your expertise and
Thank you, guys.
points. It's been great.
Really. All right.
Again, if you have a question or follow up, please reach out to Richard. Is it R. Clark or
Yes.
just Clark at USC? Did I get it right?
It's just Clark at USC.
Wow.
I had one of the
there so
original
long, they
email
have
addresses.
one person. That's great.
This
Again,
is
we'll
one
be
of the
sending out this
advantages of being an
recording,
old man.
tomorrow to people. And thanks. We'll probably have Richard come back probably about 6 months to do one about cognitive task analysis, because he says now he can do that one. Originally he says, oh, I can't do that one. but maybe we'll have.
Well, can you imagine the number of people and the kinds of legal agreements you have to get these things put together? It makes me crazy. Anyway, I'd be glad to do it. All right.
Thanks again,
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your help, Scott. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Take care, guys. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.